Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Ankita Kumar. I teach history in Janki Devi Memorial College in Department of History. The topic that I have, taken for the lecture today is factory girls, mothers, and wives, women in Meiji, Japan. It is very, very important to understand that why have I chosen this topic. That why it is very important to talk about women, especially in Meiji, Japan. We all know that on the onset of Meiji Restoration, a huge, impetus was taken by the emperor in Japan to actually start modernizing and industrialization of Japan. But what about the contribution of women? Have we overlooked it? Have we ever talked about the contribution of women? Because when we talk about industrialization, we talk about modernization. The contribution of women was very, very important, especially when they're working in factories. A lot has not been written, or maybe it has been overlooked by historians during Meiji Japan. Also, on the onset of Meiji Restoration, it gave a opportunity to the women to come out of their domestic household, come and contribute an economic contribution towards the society. So this entire aim was to modernize and westernize Japan, transition from a feudal society to an industrialization nation. This transformative period had significant implication for the status of women. As their roles, they responded to this industrialization by coming out of their house, coming from the domestic realms of their society, and to come and contribute towards it. Okay, one has to understand that actually this modernization gave them an opportunity to break the shackles of traditional household. We all know that Japan was confined by Confucius philosophy, which they believed in, that is Shintoism. So that somewhere the philosophy bounded them to the traditional roles of the women, that is to stay in their houses and become good wives and mothers. But here in my lecture, I'm going to talk about that how women was so important and their contribution should be taken into the pages of history. So we know that after the fall of Tokugawa shogunate, there emerged a new power center in Japan. The whole focus was in restructuring of the economy, society, and polity. So there came a massive growth at the cost of society's underclass. Okay, the women, the outcasts, the landless laborers, the prostitutes, and the peasants. That they were a class that were actually involved in contribution towards the industrialization, but we haven't spoken about them much in our history writing. The industrial growth of the 19th century was spearheaded by the women of the working class. As I said, the contribution of women was very, very important during industrialization of Japan. So here are some pictures that I really want to show women working in factories, especially in textile industry. So here we see colorful women in just dressed in colorful clothes, trying to contribute to certain section of society, working in industry, especially in textile industry, weaving industry, etc. So yes, let's talk about the factors which paved the way for industrial modernization. So after the restructuring of the shogunate, the political economy was now under the emperor. So now emperor was controlling the entire economy, be it society, be it polity, be it the whole restructuring of economy. And daimyos, the role of daimyos was definitely abolished. The land was reorganized into 72 prefectures, which were numbers that happened in somewhere around 1871. The entire system was actually headed by the governor, which was directly under the emperor, definitely. So a kind of allegiance was completely under the emperor. Okay, because as we all understand the Shintoism philosophy, that was emperor worship. So definitely whatever was happening in society or economy had to do with the allegiance and reverence towards the emperor. Okay, then army and education system was altered. A lot of reforms were brought about in education system as well. The officials, that is the oligarchs, like the Kido, the Omura, the Mosujira, the Yamagata, Aritimo, etc., played a very, very important and vital role in the new policies. They were the new officials who were appointed, like the Kido, the Omura, the Mosujira, the Yamagata, the Atimo, the Aritomo. So all these new officials played a very, very important role in the whole restructuring organization of modernized Japan. So let's look into the neglected perpetuators of industrial growth. The emperor taxes directly from the individuals. That enabled them to have a stable revenue for the state, which in turn paved the way for massive technological innovation. So what happens? So when you are collecting revenues through a middleman, so a lot of there are chances that that will be it gives a lot of chances for corruptions, etc. So maybe the entire revenue that is being collected by the officials might not reach the emperor. But here, when we see that emperor is reorganizing the entire structures of economy, so it became very very important for the emperor to actually have a stable government, and that in turn led to have a stable economy, because now the revenue was coming directly into the coffers of the royal treasury. Yes, so huge capital was invested in heavy industries like the silk and the cotton industry. We all know the important industrial, industries that still exist in Japan, like the Mitsubishi, like the Nippon, etc. Let's talk about the silk and the cotton industries. All came up during the Meiji period. So because they had a huge deposit of revenues and money into the coffers, that enabled technological innovations, and that led to an investment in heavy industries. There was a need for massive amount of labor to go forth in the modernization project. Obviously, now when we have industries, when we have coming up of factories, etc. So definitely we will need more labor forces. So yes, Japan started to look up in for freed up labor. So the amount of labor had to come from the freed up labor. This freed up labor were primarily the women from rural Japan who used to help their fathers and husbands in the fields. Yes, because now you know that, because all the men were definitely employed somewhere, they were working, etc. So which freed up labor would be more suitable for industrialization? Definitely the women, because earlier women actually stayed in their houses, in their domestic realms, and now when Japan was coming up with modernization and industrialization, that gave them an impetus to come up and work in factories, etc. So yes, even for the government, freed up labor, that is the women from the rural Japan, actually was an asset for them. It was not easy to bring these peasant families to terms with parting with their daughters. Not the girls were willing to leave the villages. So definitely it was a it was a sense of security. We all know, because Japan was a traditional society. So yes, a lot of pressure was on the family, or maybe the mindset was not developed enough so that they could allow their daughter to go out of their houses or villages to work. Even the daughters did not have that kind of mindset to come up and work. But so now the government, we will see that the government is taking initiatives so that the women can come forward and work in the factories. Yes, so just to give them, just to bring the kind of awareness, or just to motivate these kind of girls to come up, Japan started the National Awareness Program. So in order to convince the girls to take up the work at the factory, the government tried their best to arouse the patriotic sentiments in them. So yes, so it was a time when we know that Meiji was entire restructuring of the economy was based on a spirit of nationalism. The whole economy, or the society and the polity, worked towards integration of Japan, that is to you make Japan the world's biggest economy. And finally, we know that Japan did become a fastest growing economy of that time. So yes, so through different government programs, they started to convince the students, they convinced the girl child to come up and work, and also to arouse the patriotic sentiments within them. They gave a status to students, workers, to the daughters of the samurai and the well-to-do rural families. Yes, because if they are called workers, they might not work. They will have a taboo attached to it, that they are being called as workers. Just to give a kind of dignity in the society, the government came up with a new definition, and they started to call them as student workers. In order to show that the meal was safe place for the women to work, the local government officials started to offer their daughters to work in the factories. Yes, so what was happening now? That in order to show that the workplace is safe enough, the leader has to take the first step. So they called all the local governing officials to first take the initial step to send their own daughters to work in the factories. So it's kind of, it brings us, brings a sense of security to the parents who are in the rural villages, that since the local government or the local governors or the officials are sending their own daughters to work in the factories, so this might be a good opportunity, or this might be a good place to send their daughters to work there. So yes, I have. This is another picture that I wanted to show, that women are working in different ways, is contributing in textile industries. We know that because Japan was well known to for its textile industry, especially cotton and silk. So here is a picture for that. So here, this is an a scene from a factory where the women are working in a modernized factory. The women have reached their factories and they are working here, so giving a contribution, a huge contribution towards the economy. What was the policies that was actually followed for the recruitment? That is the recruitment agencies, as the women were considered as docile and obedient, so they could be underpaid and controlled easily. So that was also, so see, whenever we talk about growth, whenever you talk about contribution of women, when you talk about women coming ahead in the or to the forefront and contribute towards the economy, it also comes with a cost. So we are talking about a time when during the Meiji period, that generally it was considered that women should be docile, okay, and obedient enough to follow the orders of their fathers, of their husbands. So here we see that the mindset which the recruiters had in their mind is that the women were docile or obedient, so they could be underpaid very easily. Upon the recruitment, an advance fee was given to the girl's family, which enabled them to pay off their debts and defray living expenses. Yes, because you know that it was a time when it was an entire before the Meiji restoration has started. It was a complete chaos in the economy. There was a complete decline. The families, especially the rural families, were completely in debts. So that in a way also forced their fathers to send their daughters to work. So what did they get in return? So an advance was paid to the girl's family, okay, because in that way they could some way defray the payment. That is, now later on, whenever the salary was given to the girl, that would be deducted from the entire salary. So whatever debts that they had collected, or maybe the advance which was given to the families, that would in a turn be deducted from the initial or the salary of the girls. This advance had to be compensated through the wages, and this was to form a contract of 200 to 300 years, which lasted forever for about 5 to 7 years. Definitely, as I said, that this had to be compensated by the salary which was given to the girls. Yes, so it was a kind of contract which they were signing, that is something around 200 to 300 yens, and this contract lasted from 5 to 7 years. Just imagine the kind of contract they were actually pulled into. So you are definitely offering them help, you are helping their families by giving them advance so that they can pay off the debts, etc., but it is coming at a cost. That one has to understand very clearly. In many cases, the workers were not paid the minimum wages. Also, they were not paid regularly. So now you see that exploitation had started, because we are talking about beautiful images that Japan is showing us. It has large industries. It is one of the fastest growing economy. But what about the women who are working there? So they're not even being paid the minimum wages here, and also not paid regularly. So imagine the kind of trauma that the women would be undergoing when they are not even paid. There was a differentiation that was in the wages that was seen. That is, men was paid a different wages, the women were paid a different amount of wages, and here we see that they were also not paid very regularly. The wages rose with length of service and performance. Yes, it was a performance based service. So in case you are serving there or in the industry for a very long time, definitely your salary will rise with that, and you will be paid also with the length of services, that your wages were decided accordingly. Only the girls with exceptional performance were paid the official wages. So here also we see discrimination. Not everybody was hired at a similar wage. Okay, so it was decided that girls who had exceptional qualities or who had exceptional skills, they were only given the official wages. Rest, the beginners or the intern that you might say, were not hired at the official wages. They were made to work. Definitely work was abstracted from them, but not the official wage was paid to them. They were given very less than the decided official wages. The wages paid at the cotton factory was too low. The women were paid 4.05 yen, and for men it was 6.63 yen. So as I said, there was also discrimination in the salary of men and women. Okay, so here it was said that in a cotton factory, because we all know that Japan was, thriving cotton, it had thriving cotton factories. There, the wages of men and women had a differentiation that you can see. For women it was 4.05 yen, and for men it was 6.63 yen. Talking about the deplorable working condition for women, so we all know that the working industry is not very easy. It comes at a price. So here we are seeing that the girls who were made to work for 12 hours at a stretch. So you all know that there is a minimum working hours, that a maximum that we can contribute is 8 hours. But here they were made to do overtime. They were made to work for 12 hours at a stretch, and in some cases, like in Okaya, the average working hours went up to 14 hours in a day. See the kind of torturous condition in which the women was working, and maybe they were not even compensated monetary for that. Grading system was introduced in many plants, and inspector was appointed to closely supervise the grade workers and determine their wages, trying to say that grading system was adopted by them. So now an inspector would have come to the factories, and they would definitely grade the women who were working in the factories. So yes, a grading system was introduced, and their wages was decided accordingly on the grades which was given by the inspector there. So yes, we all know we are human beings. We do fall sick, but there is no place for sick leave. So if you're missing work, that means your salaries will be deducted. So there was no sick leaves for women working in this industries. Severe punishments were meted out for being inattentive or sackling the workplace. So yes, so the women there were penalized for that. If you are not working, properly, the kind of work, work that was extracted from you, you are not able to give the output, so you would be severely punished for that. Punishments were in the form of beating up, paying fines. So yes, as I said, that it was not only monetary terms in which your punishment would be, but also physical, torture, that is beating up. Sexual harassment by the inspectors went unnoticed. So yes, we all have heard about so many incidences happening. So the inspector who would come to inspect the workplaces in order to give grades to the women, because finally you have to know that the grading system decided their final wages. So yes, so the inspector could do anything that he wanted. Especially a lot of cases of sexual harassment was there, but nobody took notice of that. Nobody took a call, or maybe never nobody took action for that on the inspector, despite girls complaining about sexual harassment at the workplace. Then when you are living in hostels, or maybe when these women were living in working hostels, what deplorable condition they were living in. The women lived in dormitories owned by the companies. Yes, because they all came from the rural areas to the urban areas or the cities to work. They left the families and they were working here. The women lived in a dormitory which was owned by the company, yes, but they were not allowed to stay late, or because they had a punch time. That means they had to come back to their hostels after certain point of time, whatever, if they are working at a stretch of 14 hours, but they have to come back to their hostels on time. That means they never had a free time for themselves. They had no visitors, so it definitely, because it was considered that the women are here only to work, and a lot of work has to be extracted from them, since the company is investing so much on them. They're giving food, they're giving a place to live. So that's why it was said, or maybe that was a mindset, that they will not have visitors, because that in a way would be loss of time. So they definitely did not have visitors. They had no washing or sanitary amenities. So they were living in a very difficult times. That as a women we need to have certain amount of hygiene and a wash area which the women did not have. The dormitories were infected by lice and bedbugs. So there was a lot of reports on the unhygienic condition in which the women was living. So the dormitories were infested with lice and bedbugs. So just imagine the kind of torture that even that living in that hostel was a torture itself, and this women was living and they were putting up because they had to support their families. The working condition in the factories was not favorable. They were subjected to dampness and heat. Also, because the factories don't have a proper ventilation, they don't have a hygienic condition which the women could actually work. So it was generally damp, and it was heated lot. It was heated because you have big industries, you have machines that used to produce so much of heat. So the women was actually working in a very very deplorable condition. It was damp, it was heated up, etc. Under this unhygienic condition, it was easy for the disease to spread. So yes, because it was damp and it was heated up, so that is a very very conducive temperature or a very very conducive environment for the women to actually get infested with a lot of diseases. A lot of diseases were caught them because of this unhygienic condition. The diseases that actually caught the women are diseases such as the tuberculosis that spread like an epidemic till 1920s. TB had caused 40% of the death at the factory and 70% death after they had returned to the villages after work. That means because it was since it was a unhygienic condition, there was dampness that gave rise to tuberculosis. So we are seeing a ratio. What is the percentage? 40% of the death happened in the factory itself because women were working in damp condition. It was a lot of heat, there was no proper ventilation, and 70% of the death happened once the women or the girls went back to their villages, because generally it takes time for the disease to spread. So yes, actually tuberculosis spread like an epidemic in the factories which they were working in. So another disease that caught them was beriberi because of poor diet. So we all know that beriberi is a disease because of deficiency of vitamins. This disease happened, and definitely the diet was not proper. So we see beriberi was a disease that caught them very very easily. Insufficient time for meals and extensive work pressure also led to rise in gastrointestinal dysfunction, because you all know, because they were working at a stretch for 12 to 14 hours, so did not get proper rest, and also sitting at a one place, because that they were working in weaving industries and silk industries, so they had to sit at one place and work for a very very long time. That led to these kind of disease, that is gastrointestinal dysfunction. That it was very very common for the factory girls to suffer from these kind of disease. Cholera was rampant amongst the workers. So yes, cholera was also spreading like an epidemic in the factories where the girls was working. What happens when for a very very long time, when there is a unhygienic condition which women are working, there is a constant work pressure that is the women are facing. They are facing exploitation. So after certain point of time, it is very natural for them to find out a escape, that they really want to escape from this place. So what are the ways that they were trying to find an escape? Many of the workers unsuccessfully tried to run away from the factories and dormitory. They tried to run away because now they thought that if they want to exit formally, that they will not be allowed to exit. So they started to run away from the workplace. Most of them were captured and brought back, definitely because the women working in the factory were asset for the factory owners, that they couldn't afford that these women should run away. So most of them were captured and they were brought back. Those who had lost hope from this oppressive system committed suicide. So very very sad system that we are seeing here, that those women who thought there is no escape out from this harrowing condition, they committed suicide. So on the other hand, most of the women preferred to work in the factory than the farm. So yeah, there was a flip side to this condition as well. So the women thought that if we go back to our rural farms, definitely we cannot sit comfortably. We will have to work in farms. So most of the women thought that it is better to work in factories than in farms. For them, it was definitely a very good opportunity. Reason being that the farm was more demeaning and the food offered at the factory was better than the malnourished and the life of starvation in the villages. So there were certain section of women who thought that working in farm was demeaning to them. They thought that, at least working in factory is bringing some kind of social status to them. And they also thought that, the kind of food that was offered to them in farm was more deplorable or more malnourished than the factory food, so they preferred to stay back. So there was a different set of women. Everybody has different perspective. So certain section of women, they were okay to work in these conditions. What about the primary education? So we all know that even during the Meiji restoration, so or during the Meiji period, there was a certain restructuring of education system was done. So as the women were from the rural background, they were mostly uneducated and provincial in their outlook. So yes, so a kind of basic education was given to them, so that the girl can come and contribute to the economy. And this actually, the emperor believed, the government did believe, that education is the only instrument through which modernization would come in Japan. The company, however, started to offer primary education, yes, because you know that if they are uneducated, if they are illiterate, they will not be able to, contribute in any way to the factories, because you need to have a skill understanding. You need to be skilled enough to work in factories. So the company started to give them a primary education. But the focus of the education which was offered to the girl in the factory was only in cultivating ideas like loyalty towards the factory and the skill learning. Definitely, because the company is giving you education, they are offering you education, so they will try to give you education that will suit their motives. That is loyalty towards the company and inculcating a sense of reverence for the company, and also enhancing your skills. So in turn, you can use that skill for the factory, for the benefit of the factory. Then exercising the right, the women had begun to organize themselves into union as a result of their exposure to the US labor movement, because definitely we all know there was certain Western influence that was coming up in Japan. A lot of education policies that were formulated was based on the Western sense of education and rise. So yes, the women had started to organize themselves, because we have seen that women was definitely, undergoing a very, very bad phase, or maybe they were working in very unhygienic condition, maybe in a very, very deplorable condition. So that led them to organize themselves into unions, and this came with the exposure from the Western elements such as the US labor movement. They organized themselves and staged small protests, especially after the Sino-Japanese War, which was fought between 1894 to 1895. So yes, so after we see that after Sino-Japanese War, the women, started to protest against the government. They organized themselves and they started to stage these kind of protests. They had to face the wrath of the state and companies, because it was a time when Japan wanted progress at any cost. So yes, we are talking about a time, we are talking about, Meiji, where Japan wanted progress and growth at any cost. So yes, the women who were, staging protests, they had to face the wrath of the government. So that means the government took action on the women who protested at that time. The union, that is the labor union, was seen as a roadblocks in the eyes of the elite and also by the most citizen of the Japan. So now see, the whole restructuring was done on the national sentiment, that is arousing patriotism. Anyways, this common citizen thought that if there are labor unions, if there are women who are protesting, or maybe even the laborers are protesting, that is, somewhere or the other trying to hinder the growth process. So here we are seeing that it was not seen in a very good light. So all the labor unions that was there, it was not recognized by the government. Also, it was not given due recognition by the citizens of Japan. So the government was hell bent on complying with the wishes of the capitalists. That means, because who were the capitalists? The capitalists were people who were investing in these heavy industries. So the government had to give in to the demands of the capitalists. So definitely they were hell bent on, trying to curb any kind of roadblocks that was coming on their way. So yes, labor union was one thing that they definitely did want to do away with. The strikes were difficult to sustain because the factory owners were threatening the workers that they would be simply fired without being paid. So yes, how did they control the strike? It is very important to understand how they were trying to control the strike. they said that now you will be fired without being paid. So definitely they were trying to control these women or the union laborers, that you won't be paid your wages that is there for whatever days you have worked, you won't be paid that, right? And you will be just fired. So that in a way was attacking their economic income, right? That means you are trying to curb their rights. So definitely government did everything to give in to the wishes of the capitalists. The leaders bought at the labor movement and was loosely organized. So there was one, so if your labor unions are very not strong enough, they are not based on actual capacity, so it will definitely be demolished. So here we are seeing that the leaders definitely gave in to the wishes of the capitalists. Even the leaders of the union that I'm talking about, they definitely gave in to the wishes of the capitalists, and the organization was loosely organized. So what will happen? Definitely it will not stand in front of the government's atrocities, or maybe the whenever the government tries to suppress the labor union, it will definitely fall flat. And this is what it was happening here. A point that should be noted is that the women who were considered to be docile and obedient had to defy the authorities and go on a strike. They had taken a step to defy the benevolent patriarchal employer. So one thing that we should be, taking note of was that the women who were earlier considered docile, they were considered obedient, they were now defying the authorities. That means they were definitely defying the patriarchal setup of the Japanese society. So this is very important. So maybe the union did not survive, maybe they did not have a very successful strike, but definitely they had the courage. The women were definitely, they were organizing themselves, they understood that they even had rights as employers, and they started to defy the authorities. So this is something very important that we should take note of. The second largest employer were the women. After the textile industry, the second largest employer was the brothel. So yes, as we have said that earlier prostitution in Japan was not legalized, but in Meiji period we see that the brothel or the prostitution is being legalized. So during the Tokugawa regime, prostitution had no legal space, but here we are seeing during Meiji restoration that it was legalized. The women were brought and sold legally both within Japan and overseas to Korea, China, and Southeast Asia. So here we are, what are we seeing? We are seeing that the women were, bought and sold to different outside Japan as well. So now because it was legalized in during Tokugawa shogunate period, that we see that women are not the selling of women, or maybe the whole institution of prostitution is illegal. But here when it was legalized during the Meiji period, it became one of the second largest industry that we see. Many families, due to crop failure, poverty, and famine, sold their girls to the brothels. It is said that it is seen that because that the society in general was reeling under so many economic issues, that they had taken deaths, there was poverty, there was famine. So the rural family was forced to sell their daughters to the brothels. So yes, that is why we see that so many women were coming up, and they were part of that whole institution of prostitution. But we fail to understand that the life chosen by the women in brothel is not always a voluntary decision. So there is a taboo attached to women who are in this whole business of prostitution, or they are part of a brothel. We should understand that maybe the circumstances have forced them to choose this life. It is not willingly, or it is not, the whole process of prostitution is not voluntary always, right? It is the situation, it is a family that they have to support, that actually forces them into this business. So we always have to keep this sense in mind. So what is happening, the whole, when we're talking about this whole process of prostitution, who is bearing the brunt? It is the women who is bearing the brunt, because the family, it is very easy for the family to definitely go and sell their daughters. So yes, a section called the red light area district, and the women were displayed, the women were sold to the highest bidder. So women were put on sale to the highest bidder. So we are talking about industrialization, we are talking about growth, but here we are what are we seeing? That under the garb of modernization, under the garb of industrialization, women are being displayed, they are being put on sale here in the red light districts. There have been negative repercussions of criminalizing abortion and infanticide. The poor families sold their daughters to the brothel to counter the rising number of children. Yes, because legally abortion was not recognized in Japan. So the child that was born out of marriage was definitely huge in numbers. So the family could not sustain the economic pressure. Maybe so they started to sell their daughters. So that the only solution which these families who were poor, who did not have sufficient source of income, so they started to sell their daughters because they were not able to sustain the pressure. This was also because the ignorance about the birth control measures and lack of awareness, because definitely the rural people, the rural villages where did not not aware about the birth control measures and lack of awareness which they had regarding birth control. So definitely even that led to a huge spurt in population. That's why we see a when these families are growing in numbers, so they are selling their daughters off to these areas like the red light areas. The disproportionate sex ratio, the brothel has mostly come up in urban areas, which further to the expansion of urban spaces. We can also say that it played the role of catalyst in cartographic swelling of the cities, definitely, because what was happening, we see expansion in the whole demographic area. So yes, so there was a disproportionate sex ratio that we are seeing, because the kind of urban spaces that was developing up, it was also because of this whole process, or maybe the whole institution that was there. But this did not mean that the number of female grew in cities. Okay, this is just a mere observation that we are talking about. We are just talking about a proportionate proportion, or maybe a figure that we can talk about. It has been seen that throughout the globe, that whenever industrialization has taken place, we notice a huge disproportionate sex ratio. So we have, it is worldwide, it is world over. So when we are seeing the whole process of industrial growth, we are seeing the whole process of industrialization, modernization, etc. It is very very common in the entire whole globe that we are talking about. So there has to be a disproportion. The ratio will be disproportionate, right? So the sex ratio will be disproportionate. The number of female ratio had declined, which led to the need to a sex trade as a necessity for these working men. So it is said that because the population was dwindling, that's why it was very very important for the for to trade this women, especially in areas where men were working. So, hence the fast industrial growth saw an increase in the brothels. So it is a justification that they are coming up with, that because there was a decline in sex ratio, that's why we see there is a differentiation between men and women. They were, as the rate of birth was declining for women, so that's why we see swelling up of brothel. They have just given a justification for this. Let's talk about the barbarous treatment that was meted out to the girls. The girls below the age of puberty were forced to take customers. So definitely the brothel that we are talking about, we're talking about the prostitution, they were also living under certain pressure. The girls who did not reach the puberty still were, forced to take customers. Most of them did not know what they were stepping into before they were sold off. Most of the girls, they did not know that what they are, heading towards. They were really unaware about it. As the Japanese activities had intensified in Korea and Manchuria, a large number of brothels began to spring up in this area as well. So we are seeing that we are talking about, the topic that I have chosen. We are talking about industrial growth. We're talking about modernization of Japan. It is a very beautiful picture that is being displayed. But what are we seeing? We are seeing that Japan, when it had started to expand its territory, especially in Korea and Manchuria, we are seeing that even there the number of brothel is swelling up. And what justification it was given? Because the sex ratio has been declining, that's why we need these girls for the working men there. So during the Second World War, we are seeing that when Japanese went towards westward into Asia during the Second World War, they took along with them the brothel. So it is said that when the Japanese soldiers started to embark on their journey towards the west side during the Second World War, they did carry a brothel along with them. A large contingent of sex slaves marched alongside the frontline battalions of the Japanese army. Many of these women were left for dead once the war was over. So they were used as the first line of protection. I hope you can imagine the kind of atrocities that these women in prostitution were facing. They did not had any kind of rights for them. So whenever these men were going for wars, the first line of defense was, it was done by the women who were brought as, as a part of brothel. And once if they are dead, nobody claimed their bodies. That means the kind of sad story. You can see what kind of ending did the women had in their lives. They were carried to these, war zones, and when they died, nobody was there to claim their bodies. So women in the political sphere, the state did not completely exclude the women from the political space and nation building efforts, but the role were very, very limited in nature, definitely, because the government understood that we cannot de-alienate the, women, or maybe we cannot isolate the women from the political sphere. We have to give them certain spaces. So, but their roles were very, very limited here. The state-sponsored education system mostly dwelled into the idea of gendering the citizen of Meiji Japan. So yes, the whole education system that was rolled out, that was somewhere or the other, influenced by gendering the education. Along with the home ministry and the various legislation, the twin idols of good wife and the wise mother was very, very popular in 1890s. What I'm trying to say is that even the education system that was rolled out, that was also centering around the women should be good wife and good mother. So in a way, we are trying to give a domestic space to the women. We are not trying to isolate them. We are giving them education. What Japan is saying, that we are giving them education, but the education for the women was to become a good wife and a good mother at the end of the day. But these idols were only for the middle class women, because the labor class was required for the factories. You see the kind of, hypocrisy that is there. Because if you try to, tame the lower class or the labor class women, they will not work for you, right? Because they have to come out, they have to work in factories, they have to go and work in the farms. You cannot tame them. So all this education that is there for good wives to become good wives or good women was only limited to the middle class or the upper class women. So the cult of productivity versus the cult of domesticity. For the lower class women, it was the cult of productivity rather than the cult of domesticity that was propagated. Yes, because you know that when you belong to a certain class, that is working class, you have to actually you have as many number of members in the family. So the cult of productivity was important for them rather than cult of domesticity. So who actually adhered to the cult of domesticity? It was the upper class and the middle class women, because they were required to take care of their families. They were required to become good wives and good mothers, etc. So yes, so there is a so whenever we talk about cult of productivity versus the cult of domesticity, so you can even see differentiation here. The lower class women is adhering to the cult of productivity, and the middle class women is adhering to the cult of domesticity. It is an example showing how an ideology functions in our Asian societies, creating a rather perpetual labor force by exploiting a certain class, the ideological craft of the dominant class. We are trying to say that how these ideologies are working. We are saying that we are rolling out, that we are modernizing, we are in one of the fastest growing population. But what are we doing in actuality? What is the ideology that is going behind this? It is the Asian, that is, we are creating a differentiation. This is a perpetual ideology which is coming into play. That is, women, their role is limited only to domesticity, and when we come to labor class, their role is limited to productivity, because we have to have them in our production, that is also for the children, and also to contribute in factories as well as to contribute in farm, etc. So the ideas of morality, frugality and purity. So the ideals of modesty, frugality and purity were encouraged by the state among the upper and the middle class women. As I said, that how is the ideology working? We have to understand that the ideology of frugality and purity was only for the upper class and middle class women. This was not for the lower class women. The role of women was restricted only to kitchen, as I said, that because it was a cult of domesticity that was being followed, most of their role was related to kitchen itself. The Meiji reformists readily embraced the Eurocentric patriarchal potholes and the new ideas despite having a great culture of debate and dialogue. It is said that, the traditional Japanese ideology was more advanced, but they blindly followed the Western concept of modernization, which was full of potholes, which again, pushed the women backwards. That is, they pushed the women role to the kitchen itself. And earlier, when we talk about Japanese, ideology, it was very, very advanced. It is said by a lot of historians. The traditional patriarchal idea of women as the homemaker was sustained in Japan, and they were also prevented from participating in any political meeting or political organization. It was said that the Western concept of modernization was as such that the women's role was only limited to homemakers, rather, taking or considering women for political development or any kind of, their role in organization. So that was a very, very Western concept. So school became the socializing agent. As we said, education was given to women in a certain way. So education became a training ground for the women. So what kind of wives and mother you have to become. The school offered a socialization agent for this agenda of the state. The school became the center to produce women of fine taste and good characters. It was said that the whole education system function that the women have to be cultured, they have to be of good character, they have to be women of fine taste in music, dance, etc. Because they have to be considered as good wives. They could be married off to good husbands or rich husbands at the end of the day. They were made to study less of academic subjects and more on domestic learning skills. Obviously, because the role of the women was only limited to domesticity. They had to be good homemakers. So even the education that was given to them was designed accordingly. So most of the education did not focus on any kind of academics. It was mostly to become and to learn domestic skills. Only to be mentioned that this exclusively for the upper and the middle class women. So time and again, I'm mentioning that all the modernization or the education policy that we are talking about, it is only limited to the upper and the middle class women, because anyways the labor class women are bound to work in factories. They have to contribute in the so-called growth of Japan's economy. This education or the education that we are talking about here is not for the labor class women. The labor class was only educated to spend their lives in factory. As I said, the life of labor class women was only to spend their lives in factories, that we have already talked about, how factory worked as an agency to give them education, and they wanted or loyalty in return. So reforms by the social activists, they were women who actually actively rallied for the social reforms. The Tokyo Women's Reform Society attacked the concubine and the prostitution system, because definitely the women started to be aware about their rights, and they started to attack the whole process of prostitution and concubine system. The government was forced to pass regulation regarding the prostitution. The government was forced, because now when the women started to organize themselves and fight for the cause, the government was forced to pass a regulation regarding the whole institution of prostitution. They had a unique way of protesting, that was to change their hairstyle and crop their hair short. This was something unacceptable in the Japanese society as per the beauty norm. So how were the women showing resistance? So they chopped off their hair, because generally hair is considered to be a symbol of beauty for the women in the Asian society. Same was with Japan. So they started to show the resistance through chopping off their hair. Introduction of civil code permanently gave the women the subordinate status in the society. So definitely a civil code was introduced by the government in 1898. So that gave a subordinate status to women. The women were confined to the household, that we have talked about. The married woman had no economic independence or right to take independent legal action. That means even a woman is married and she is facing any kind of a problem in her marriage, she did not have any kind of right to take any kind of legal action. The capitalist system worked its play in exploiting the weakest section in the society, that were the women at that time. The massive industrial strength of which Japan is proud of today, and the world admires with awe, came with a huge price. What I all want to say is that we are definitely seeing a very, very beautiful picture of Japan. We are seeing modernized state, we are seeing industrial growth, but it came at a very, very heavy cost. And who were made to pay the cost? It was the women who were made to pay the cost. So it is definitely a very, very important segment in history that we should look into. It should intrigue you to come and read about this section. So that is all for my lecture today. Thank you so much. Please reach out to me for further queries, etc.